I'm Frank, 72 years old, sitting here under the soft glow of this old lamp in my worn-out trailer in Montana, and tonight I can't shake a memory that's been tugging at my sleeve all day. I can still smell the pine needles underfoot and taste the chill of early morning dew on my tongue as though it happened yesterday, not 30 years ago. I remember the crackle of frost under my boots, the way the sun peeked through those tall pines just enough to paint golden stripes on the forest floor, and how I looked over at Matthew, my boy, his breath puffing like a little steam engine in the crisp air. I taught him to hunt when he was 10, passed down every lesson I learned from my own father and from my days in Nam, steady aim, patient waiting, respect for the land and the life it sustains. But there's something about that morning that still gnaws at my chest. It was a Tuesday, I think, though days blurred back then, and we'd tracked a lone buck for most of the dawn hours, moving in silence because that's how I believed a man showed strength, never raising his voice, never letting his guard down. And yet, in that hush, there was a storm brewing in my son's heart when I hadn't seen coming. Around the 20th second of that morning, right when the light hit the dose code in a way that made my breath catch, I want you, if you've got a minute, just to tap that like button or leave a little comment down below. It might sound odd coming from an old man like me, but it helps more than you know. And if you'd subscribe, well, we'd just be family gathered around the fire, telling a story or two. But back then, we had no audience except the silent trees and the bruise-colored sky. Matt lifted his rifle, my rifle, and for a heartbeat, I thought he'd squeeze the trigger like I taught him, to honor what we'd come here to do. Only this time he didn't. He held that stock tight against his shoulder, finger hooked on the trigger guard, eyes locked not on the deer but on me, and I felt the world halt. Every rustle, every bird call, every beating syllable in my chest paused, waiting for what was next. He didn't fire. He didn't speak. He just lowered the gun and turned away, shoulders rigid, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding so loud I thought the whole forest would hear it. I didn't know then if he meant to pull the trigger or if he was testing me, testing us both. All I knew was that I looked at my son and saw a stranger's face where his used to be. That moment, that frozen piece of time, is why I can't sleep some nights, because I taught him to be unbreakable, to bear the weight of the world without crying, and maybe I forgot to teach him how to feel. Maybe I built him like I built that barn back on the farm, sturdy, unyielding, and without a window to let the light in. And so that memory sticks around my neck like a loose bullet, jangling every time I try to rest. Tonight I'm sharing it with you, because if there's one thing I've learned in these long years, it's that we carry our past with us until someone listens. So here I am, an old man with a story that still stings, inviting you to sit with me a spell and wonder what happens when love gets taught with too much grit and not enough grace. I was just a boy, maybe 12 or 13, when my world first settled into the rhythm of sunrises and plowed fields, the warmth of my ma's biscuits drifting through the kitchen window before dawn. We lived not far from a dirt road that wound through golden wheat fields outside a little town in Montana, where everyone knew your name and your troubles were handed down over strong coffee and soft smiles. My pa worked the land from first light to last, teaching me how to drive that old Ford tractor without tipping it, how to feel the earth's heartbeat through the steering wheel. Back then, I believed the kindest thing a man could be was steady, never too loud, never too soft, just enough so folks knew they could count on you. I dreamed of chasing the horizons beyond those fields, maybe hitchhiking east to see the skyscrapers in New York or wandering into a war like I'd read about in those glossy magazines. But I always came home by supper time, because home was where a man's purpose lay and where his people needed him. Ma sang hymns in the evenings on our creaky porch, her voice soft as a lullaby, and Pa would take my hand and point out constellations, saying that out in the quiet sky you could lose your worries if you just looked hard enough. We had neighbors who stopped by with baskets of fresh peaches in the summer and pies in the fall, and every Sunday we gathered for potluck at the little white church at the end of our lane. I watched children run barefoot through the grass, their laughter bouncing off the hills like birdsong, and I thought that this must be what heaven smelled like, dirt and wild flowers and sweet tea. In those days, I had faith that kindness would circle back around, that a helping hand offered today would be returned tomorrow when I needed it most. I saw Pa's calloused hands tremble only once, after Ma got sick one winter. He carried her inside and laid her down beside the wood stove before he went outside and split enough logs to keep us warm for a week. I stood there in my little coat, watching him work, and realized that courage wasn't about fighting battles on distant shores. It was about keeping your family safe when the nights turn cold and the shadows press in at the windows. I thought then that I could face anything because I had love and I had purpose. I married a school teacher with hair the color of autumn wheat, and we carved out our own bit of land next door to my folks. Together we built a barn from scratch, hammer by hammer, and I taught Matthew to tap the boards lightly to hear if any were loose, to trust his hands and his eye. We raised chickens and grew corn, and I believed I was passing on something good, a legacy of work and quiet understanding. I used to tell him, "Son, life is as steady as you make it. Plant kindness like seeds and harvest loyalty." But even then, I didn't know that kindness sometimes needs a voice to be heard, that love needs to be spoken, not just shown. As I stand here now, older and grayer than that boy who watched Pa Splitwood in the moonlight, I realize how much I carried forward from those fields, the loyalty, the silence, the belief that a man's worth is measured in sweat and resolve. And I wonder if I taught my son too well, if I built a fortress so unyielding that he never found a window to let the light in. Because in that unspoken space, a boy can grow restless, a heart can harden, and the landscape of love can turn as barren as a winter field left untilled. I still remember the day Amelia walked into my life like a fresh breeze through an old barn door. It was spring of 1964. The air was crisp with the faint promise of summer's warmth, and I just turned 18 and was helping Pa bale hay in the fields when I spotted her, tall and bright as a morning star at the little country schoolhouse where she'd come to teach. I couldn't explain why my heart thumped so fierce, like a wild drum echoing off the hills. But I knew in that instant that nothing in my world would ever be quite the same. She wore a simple dress, soft blue cotton that caught the sunlight, and carried a stack of books hugged close to her chest. When she smiled, the scent of lilac drifted through the breeze, and for a moment I thought I might choke on the sweetness of it. I'd been raised on the steady rhythm of dawn chores and supper at sunset, never one for sudden jolts of awe, and yet there she was, a living reminder that life could bloom in the most unexpected corners of a dusty town. That afternoon, I found myself hovering near the schoolhouse gate long after the last plow horse had ambled home, watching her teach little ones their letters and numbers with a patience I'd only ever seen Pa reserve for the stubborn mule down by the creek. I saw the way her eyes lit up when a child grasped a new idea, and I felt something inside me crack open, like the first green bud pushing through frozen ground. I didn't speak to her that day, but I carried her voice in my mind, the gentle lesson in fractions, the soft laughter when a boy mixed up his words, and I dreamed of being the kind of man who could offer that same spark of hope to another soul. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to pass by the schoolhouse, to fetch a broken fence board, to deliver Pa's fresh eggs, to pretend I might need help reading a letter I just received from the draft office. Amelia would glance up, her gaze steady and warm, and somehow I managed to let my nerves stay hidden behind a calm I'd learned long before in the trenches of youthful competition. Then one afternoon, as I handed her that tattered envelope, she paused, looked into my eyes, and said, "Frank, you carry more kindness in your hands than most men carry in their whole hearts." I swear the ground shifted beneath my boots, because I'd never heard words so soft land so heavy. And right then, standing under that wide sky with the school bell chime lingering in the air, I felt the first stirrings of a purpose beyond the plow and the rifle, a purpose born of love and the promise of companionship, of building something tender where toughness had always been king. Amelia didn't just teach me how to care for others, she unspooled a part of me I didn't know was wound so tight, a part that longed to speak the quiet words my father never did. "I love you. I'm proud. I'm here." In the months that followed, we walked those dirt roads hand in hand, sharing dreams beneath the towering pines and making plans for a life stitched together with gentler threads than I'd ever known. When she slipped her hand into mine and told me she'd carry my love with her always, I felt as if I could face whatever storms might come, because for the first time, I understood that strength wasn't just about standing firm against the wind, but about opening yourself to what might sweep you off your feet. That meeting, that moment when I saw her and felt my world tilt, set me on a path that led to a little trailer down in Montana, to raising my own boy with lessons learned under Amelia's guiding light. And though I tried to pass on her kindness, I fear I sometimes forgot the lesson she taught me most of all, that a heart needs more than discipline and stoicism. It needs the courage to stay open and the grace to let others in. I remember the morning I woke to silence instead of Ma's humming by the stove, the way the sun felt colder through the trailer window after she'd been gone only a week. That was the first blow that cracked the world I thought I'd built steady and sure. Suddenly the chores felt like too much, feeding the chickens, hauling water, keeping the heater stoked, and I'd watch Matthew stumble through his breakfast with eyes too big for his face, like he didn't know whether to cry or run. Folks in town kept their distance after that, offering polite condolences but never asking if I needed help. Pa's old friend Jim came by once, tried to split a few logs, then cleared his throat and said maybe I should think about selling off a few acres or moving in with kin. But I clenched my jaw and shook my head, because admitting I couldn't handle it felt like confessing I'd failed Ma and failed my boy all in one breath. Inside me, a storm brewed, rage at a world that took the gentlest soul I'd ever known, fear that I'd drown under the weight of trying to fill her place, and shame that I couldn't just move on like everyone said I should. Some nights I pressed my forehead into my hands and could hear Matthew's soft breathing in the next room, and I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that I'd find a way to keep us safe. But the words wouldn't come. They stuck in my throat like shot glass shards. So instead, I put on a brave face each dawn and walked that patch of land as if the ground itself had answers, feeling hollow as I did it. Then there was the letter from the VA telling me I'd been approved for more support, but the form was so thick with government talk I didn't know where to begin, and pride gnawed at me, whispering that a veteran shouldn't need coaxing to stand on his own 2 feet. For a while, I pretended to Ma's empty rocking chair that I was fine, that a man could bear his burdens alone. But my chest ached every morning, and I caught myself staring off into the distance when a car went by with a family inside, thinking of how Amelia and I would have done things differently if she'd lived to see us grow old. Matthew started slamming doors and yelling at his toy guns, and I saw the same confusion in his eyes that I felt in mine. We had no one to teach us how to handle grief, no words for the anger or the guilt that wrapped its icy fingers around our hearts. My neighbors whispered that I should send Matt to live with kin or with Pa, tell him a barn couldn't make a home without his mother. But how could I let him go when I was all he had left? And so the external pressure and the internal chaos wove together until I was a man torn in two, someone who knew how to survive the wild but didn't know how to survive a loss like that. Someone who believed in kindness but didn't trust himself to show it when it mattered most. In those days, I'd wander the edge of the woods as if I were looking for a way back to a life that no longer existed, and every snapped twig underfoot felt like a reminder that the world had shifted on its axis. I feared that if I let go of the reins for even a moment, everything would collapse. The boy, the farm, the memory of a love I'd held too tight and lost too soon. That fear turned me hard, made me cradle the rifle like it was my only friend and the only promise that I could keep things under control. But control is a thin shield against grief, and before long I realized that the true battle was inside my own chest, and no amount of training or pride could teach me to face it alone. I remember how the morning air seemed to hold its breath as Matt and I eased through a thicket in that old clearing, the forest around us hushed like a cathedral awaiting a final prayer. My heart was steady, because I had taught him to steady it, with each careful step echoing the countless lessons I had passed on: how to track the deer's hoof prints, how to cradle the rifle stock against your shoulders so it doesn't shake, how to wait until the moment is your own before you even consider pulling the trigger. And yet that morning, something invisible snapped between us. We crouched behind a mossy log when I saw his shoulders tense and heard the faintest intake of breath, not at the sight of the deer pawing at the leaf litter, but at the sound of my own name, whispered so softly it felt like a warning. Then he lifted the rifle, and for an instant I thought he was merely positioning himself for a clear shot. But time halted in that split second as I realized his aim wasn't trained on the buck grazing a few yards ahead, it was resting on my chest. And I swear the world stilled. The birds froze mid-song. The wind stopped stirring the needles above us, and even my own pulse seemed to fade into silence. He didn't say a word. He just stared down the barrel with a look in his eyes that I had never seen before. equal parts accusation and agony. I felt a chill thread its way through my spine as the weight of every harsh lesson I'd ever taught him pressed down like an iron lid on my lungs. I remember the echo of my own breath sounding unnatural in my ears, like someone else's voice trapped in a bottle. And I knew in that moment that he had carried all my expectations until they became a burden too heavy to bear. I thought of every time I had hushed his tears, every time I had chosen silence over comfort, every time I had believed that strength meant never showing weakness. And there he was, the boy I had raised to stand firm, pointing that rifle not at an animal, but at the man who built his world. I closed my eyes and prayed he wouldn't pull the trigger, not because I feared death, but because I feared what it would mean for both our souls. My finger twitched by instinct at the rifle's trigger guard, the position I taught him, but I kept it there out of reflex, not intent. Then, as though the forest granted me a reprieve, he lowered the rifle, his hands shaking, and turned his head away, shoulders trembling with silent sobs. I watched him without moving, my own chest hollow, as he stepped back into the open clearing and vanished behind a stand of pines. In that moment, I lost my son for the first time, not to the wilderness, but to the chasm that had formed between a father and his boy when love was taught with too much discipline and not enough tenderness. I stood there long after his figure disappeared, feeling something inside me crack open and fall away, leaving me raw and exposed. What I lost then was not just the boy I thought I knew, but the illusion that a man could protect his child by forging him in fire. I lost the faith that silence alone could keep our bond unbroken, and I realized that I had to learn a new kind of courage, the courage to acknowledge my own failings and to ask for forgiveness I'd never believed I needed. Walking back to camp, I carried that weight like a spent shell casing, empty and hollow. But in its emptiness, I felt the first stirrings of something like hope, a fragile whisper that maybe, if I could face my own heart, I might find my way back to the son who once trusted me enough to follow my lead. I came home that afternoon to a stillness so deep it felt like the world had folded in on itself. The sky was pale as washed denim, and the trailer stood silent under the weight of everything that had happened. I remember stepping inside and finding the chair where Matthew used to sit empty, its cushion pressed down by memories I couldn't bear to face. The rifle lay in the corner, its barrel cold and accusing, and I realized I didn't know how to take it apart, not after what it had meant that day. In the days that followed, I walked through my routines like a ghost, feeding the chickens, hauling water, stacking wood. Each task an echo of a life I'd once known but could no longer trust. The mornings tasted of ash in my mouth, and at night I'd stare at the ceiling and hear the silence roar louder than any storm. I tried to talk to Pa on the phone, but the words caught in my throat as if they had turned to gravel. He offered to come out to help with the chores, but I told him I was fine, and the lie clung to my tongue so tightly I didn't dare confess the truth, that I was undone, unmoored, and afraid of what I'd become. I didn't hear from Matthew for weeks. Letters sat unopened on the counter, and I feared each glance at the mailbox would bring nothing but the same emptiness I felt each morning. I remembered the look in his eyes when the rifle was pointed at me, the pain, the betrayal, the question of whether I had ever loved him enough, and that memory was a stone in my chest I couldn't lift. At first I flinched at every sudden sound, expecting the crack of rifle fire to echo in the trailer walls at any moment. Then I realized the real danger was the silence, how it stretched between us like a canyon impossible to cross. I tried to fill the space, wood carving at dusk, letters I never sent, prayers muttered over the wood stove, but each effort felt hollow, as though I was speaking into a void where only echoes lived. My faith in myself crumbled. The man who believed he could shape his son as he wished discovered that a child's heart can shift like sand, and the foundations we build on can sink without warning. Neighbors stopped dropping by after a while, as if giving me the solitude I neither wanted nor deserved. Their absence was a balm and a curse. I had room to grieve, but nothing to remind me that someone still cared. I found myself wandering the edges of the property at dusk, searching for footprints or broken twigs, any sign that Matthew might return to talk, to forgive, to explain what he'd felt. But the forest only returned my own ragged breathing. Without Amelia's gentle counsel, I had no words for the anger and fear wrapped tight in my chest, no way to unbend the rigid lines I'd taught my boy to draw between emotion and control. Slowly, the seasons turned. Frost came and went, wildflowers bloomed and died in quiet cycles I once revered. But the rhythm felt cruel now, a reminder that the world keeps moving even when your heart stands still. I found a dusty photograph of us three, Amelia, Matthew, and me, laughing by the barn door, and for a moment I believed I could piece things back together. I held it so long the ink began to soften under my fingers. Then I wiped my eyes, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my coat pocket, a talisman against despair. In the emptiness that followed, I realized that acceptance might be the only path forward. Not the acceptance of what happened that would swallow me whole, but acceptance of my own brokenness and the possibility that healing could start in silence, one breath at a time. So I've come here to share this with you, because sometimes we need to face our darkest hours under the witness of another soul. I've learned that loss can strip us bare, but it can also plant a seed of humility, a reminder that life's worth isn't measured by how firmly we stand, but by how bravely we let ourselves be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, perhaps there lies the first step back toward hope. I woke one morning to the faint scent of pine and fresh coffee drifting through my trailer window, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I'd thought long gone, quiet hope. It came from the simplest of moments. I'd been clearing brush along the fence line when a neighbor's little boy, Tommy, wandered over with wide eyes and a timid smile, clutching a battered tin can of peaches he'd begged his ma to give me. He stood there, shifting from one foot to the other, and in that awkward pause, I remembered what it felt like to be seen not as the gruff veteran or the grieving widower, but as someone who might just offer a kind word or a helping hand. I thanked him, of course, though my voice shook a bit, and I told him to take an extra peach for his ma, because kindness is something you pass along as easily as you pass along memories. Watching Tommy scamper back home, can of peaches swinging at his side, I felt the tight knot in my chest loosen just enough to breathe. That afternoon, I dug out the old tool chest Amelia had given me on our first anniversary and found the plans for the birdhouse I'd never gotten around to building. I set to work with hammer and nails, and as each board clicked into place, it felt like I was nailing together the pieces of my own heart. The rhythmic thunk of what on would soothe the restlessness I'd carried, and by sunset, a small home for birds stood on my workbench, ready for paint and feathers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A few days later, I received a letter edged in pencil from my granddaughter, Sarah. She'd drawn a picture of me and Matthew standing under a cedar tree, arms outstretched like we owned the world. In tiny letters at the bottom, she'd written, "I think you can fix the broken pieces, Grandpa. Love, S." I cried then, quietly, because it was the first time I'd heard my own heart spoken aloud in months. Sarah's belief in me, a child's unwavering conviction, became the gentle breeze that filled my sails after a long storm. With that, I decided to offer my old hunting gear and knowledge to the next generation, not as a way to teach toughness, but as a way to teach respect for nature, for life, and for our own fragile emotions. I called the local community center and volunteered to lead a weekend class for fathers and sons, encouraging them to talk openly as they tracked deer footprints or learned to clean a rifle safely. When the day came, I greeted each family with a quiet nod and a weathered smile, and as we walked in the woods together, I listened more than I spoke, asking gentle questions. How are you feeling? What do you think of this trail? Who are you doing this for? And I realized that sharing my story of loss and reconciliation gave other men permission to share theirs, to let down their guard and open their hearts. By the time I drove home, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a sense of purpose that stretched beyond the boundaries of my own pain. That evening, I painted the birdhouse a deep forest green and hung it outside my window, listening for the flutter of wings as the first bluebird claimed its new home. In that moment, I understood that a broken heart can be mended not by forgetting the cracks, but by filling them with acts of kindness, community, and a willingness to begin again. And though I carry the weight of what happened between Matthew and me, I now carry it with gentler hands, believing that each small gesture, each peach offered, each birdhouse built, each question asked can be the impulse that leads us all back toward hope. I stood at the edge of that worn kitchen table, the morning light painting dust motes in the air like tiny lanterns guiding me back to myself, and I realized I had carried the weight of my past long enough. For years, I'd shouldered my mistakes and my failures as though they were the only armor capable of protecting me from ever being hurt again, but in truth they'd become shackles, binding me to a life of regret and silence. That day, I made a choice, a quiet, deliberate choice that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. I picked up the old leather-bound journal where I'd poured out my secrets in shaky handwriting, every page a confession I never dared speak aloud. With steady hands, I closed it and set it on the table, the finality of its snap echoing in the stillness of the trailer. Then I walked outside, feeling the crisp Montana air fill my lungs, and there beneath the cedar tree where Matthew and I once carved our initials, I carried that journal to the fire pit and laid it gently on the stones. As the flames flickered to life, I watched the pages curl and blacken, smoke lifting them skyward in quiet spirals until the leather cover cracked and turned to ash. In that moment, I wasn't destroying my past, I was freeing myself from its hold. I chose to forgive myself for the ways I'd let my pride overshadow compassion, for the moments I'd built walls instead of bridges, and for the lessons I'd taught too harshly without the tenderness they required. I chose to live on, without grudges or lingering sorrow, embracing the understanding that our scars can become the foundation for something new rather than the tombstones of what we once were. Walking back into the trailer, I felt lighter, as though a window had been pried open in my heart and fresh air was finally allowed to circulate. I took down the rifle from its place on the wall, ran my fingers along its barrel one last time, and slid it carefully into its case, no longer a symbol of control or fear, but a tool to be respected, not revered. I placed it in the closet, alongside the patches of my military uniform I no longer wore, and with each item stowed away, I acknowledged that those parts of my life had shaped me, but they did not define the man I am today or the man I aspire to be. In the days that followed, I felt a subtle shift in the way I moved through the world. Mornings came with a gentle curiosity instead of a knot of dread, and when Sarah's laughter drifted across the yard, I responded not with a distant nod but with a genuine grin. I began to speak the words I'd once left unspoken. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I love you, and I'm here now. The tremor in my voice wasn't weakness, it was evidence of a heart reopening after a long winter. I reached out to Matthew with a letter of my own, honest and unvarnished, admitting my faults and offering my hand in reconciliation. And though I don't know where that letter sits today, in his nightstand drawer or in the embers of time, I know that sending it was the bravest thing I'd done since that morning in the woods. Because living with no pretenses, no regrets, simply moving forward, that's where life truly begins. I chose to let the past rest without letting it rest on me. I chose to embrace each new dawn as a gift rather than a burden. And every time I pass by that cedar tree, I remember the day I watched my pain burn away and felt the promise of a life rebuilt from ashes. I chose to live on, without pretension, without regret, just on, with an open heart and the courage to face what comes next. I've walked through more seasons than I can count, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that strength and tenderness are not opposites but two sides of the same coin. When I was a boy on my pa's farm, I thought steady silence meant dependability, and when I became a man in Nam, I believed that showing no fear was the bravest act. Yet I taught my son Matthew to bear his burdens in solitude, to steel his heart against pain, and in doing so I built a wall between us that nearly destroyed the very bond one tried to protect. It wasn't until the day he raised that rifle pointed not at deer but at me that I understood the cost of unspoken love and unexpressed sorrow. I realized that life isn't lived in perfect moments of triumph but in the quiet exchanges we too often take for granted. The "I'm proud of you," the "I'm sorry," the simple reach for a hand in the dark. True courage, I now see, is found not in suppressing emotion but in embracing it, naming our fears, offering our forgiveness, and admitting that some wounds only heal when shared. I learned that building resilience in another human heart means teaching them not only how to stand firm but also how to lean on someone else when the world shakes beneath their feet. In the aftermath of my proudest lessons and my deepest regrets, I discovered that the greatest gift we can offer is our presence, an open ear, an honest word, a willingness to say, "I love you," before time slips away. When I burned my journal and set aside my rifle, I wasn't discarding my past, but choosing to let it guide me toward a life lived in the light of compassion instead of the shadows of regret. And when I felt a spark of hope in young Tommy's shy grin or read the faith in Sarah's drawing, I knew that a single act of kindness, or a single confession of the heart, can ripple through generations, mending what was once broken and planting seeds for a future richer than any harvest of fields or trophies of the hunt. So perhaps this truth can help you as it helped me. Don't wait for silence to become a canyon too deep to cross. Don't assume tomorrow will come with perfect timing to mend what's frayed between you and the ones you love. If there's a word unspoken, say it. If there's an apology you owe, offer it. If there's an embrace you've withheld, give it freely. Because at the end of our days, it's not the burdens we bore that define us, but the compassion we shared, the bridges we built, and the lives we touched. Maybe it's time for you, too, to stop waiting and start opening your heart, right here, right now. As I sit here under the gentle hum of this old lamp, I feel the weight of every sunrise and every sunset that brought me to this moment, and I want you to know that this story isn't just a tale of days gone by, it lives in my every breath right now, today. I've shared how a boy became a man under my watch, how love was taught with rifles and silences, and how that very love turned into a shadow that nearly swallowed us both. But I believe that true love, the kind that runs deeper than blood or memory, has a way of returning, like a river finding its course after the flood. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine the faces of those you hold most dear, the child who looks up at you with endless questions, the partner who rests their hand in yours as if no words are needed, the friend whose laughter warms a winter day. Now ask yourself, what have you left unsaid? What embrace have you held back? What forgiveness have you postponed until tomorrow? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that tomorrow is never guaranteed, and the moments we waste waiting for the right time can turn into regrets that echo in our loneliness. I chose to breathe life into my days by setting aside the armor of pride and the burden of unspoken sorrow, and in doing so I discovered that strength is found in vulnerability, and wisdom lies in admitting our mistakes and offering our hearts without reservation. I forgave my son before I even knew if he'd forgive me, and I let go of the past even when it felt like letting go of myself. And in that act of surrender, I found a peace I had never known, a gentle assurance that love doesn't vanish when we falter, it simply waits for us to remember how to open the door. So, dear friend, as you listen to this flickering tape, I invite you to lean forward and feel the warmth of these words as if I were speaking them just to you. Know that this story is not a warning but an invitation to speak your truth, to unburden your soul, and to reach out to those who matter most before the hush of regret fills the spaces between you. And now, I want to leave you with a question that's been on my mind ever since Amelia's laughter first echoed through my life, and ever since Matthew's eyes held both love and betrayal. And what do you think? Should true love always find its way back? I leave you with that thought, like a single bluebird perched on your windowsill at dawn, waiting for your answer. Sometimes, when the wind stirs the cedar branches just so, I swear I can hear her humming that old hymn on the porch, as if she remembers every promise we ever made. And sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of Matthew's daughter playing in the yard, I see the same curious light in her eyes that Amelia once had, and I think, perhaps, that love does remember, and perhaps in remembering, it finds the courage to return.